Hey everyone, Ready Rex here, and this is the update to my last video on Clancy, the new 21 Pilots album. So when I initially put out that video, I wasn't expecting more than just 200 or 300 views, nothing too crazy. I literally just was making it like a form of video diary just because I wanted to talk about that album so bad after listening to it. And none of my friends really like 21 Pilots for the most part, so I really wanted to just talk about it right on the spot, and it ended up getting a decent amount of views compared to what I was expecting. So I decided I'd do another update, and I've listened to the album a lot more since then. So some of my opinions have changed from what they were when I first time listened versus now. I actually wrote down like a bunch of notes to talk about regarding it. Yeah, I guess I'll just get into it. This is more, actually, well, I should probably mention, this one's going to be more of an actual review. It's going to be a very laid back review, but it's definitely more on the review lines. Now that I've listened to it this much, I have some certainty with how I feel about the album now. In some ways, I still feel a lot of the same regarding how the album is formatted. I do still think it's a bit disorganized. I don't know if that was the goal or not. I did notice one of the comments did mention that it could have been a label decision where they just had to, they were kind of forced to put on either like one more song or two more songs or something. And I could see that because it does feel a bit disorganized. And then speaking of that, one of my main points was that The Craving was like one of the main songs that really took that momentum away from the beginning. I listened to the single version finally because I didn't know that there was a difference beforehand. I thought it was the exact same, the single versus the album version. And I think the single version would have been quite a bit better on the album, to be honest. The acoustic version really does slow it down quite a bit. The single version, while it is slower, it's just up a little more. Like, it's slightly more upbeat to the point where I think it wouldn't have hit the album as hard if it was that version instead. So yeah, I'm just going to start going through song by song, kind of. Well, actually, I'm going to kind of group together the first three singles. We got Overcompensate, Next Semester, Backslide. I still feel very strongly about these songs. I really like all of them. Out of the three, Overcompensate is still my least favorite. But yeah, Next Semester and Backslide are still some of my favorite 21 Pilots songs that I've heard up to date. And that's saying something because I mentioned it to somebody that left a comment, but I don't even know if I talked about it in the last video, but I've been listening to 21 Pilots for like 10 years probably. It's been a long time. They've been in my life for like half of it. So yeah, I've been listening for a while and I listen to like all of their songs. So for those two to be some of the best is like really cool. Like, that's awesome that I can say that those songs beat out a lot of other songs that I really enjoyed from them. So yeah, those three are fantastic. I still feel exactly the same. Then we move on to Midwest Indigo. I didn't get super specific on these ones last time. This time, though, when I was listening through it, I realized that out of all the songs on this album, that one really feels like a Blurry Face song. I'm not sure what about it, but it kind of feels like it's on the same lines as like Tear in My Heart or something. It really just feels like it could have been put on that album, other than some slight differences that are in it that I think kind of cater towards Next Semester and Backslide sound. It feels like it's a nice mix between like those two singles and then some Blurry Face songs, which I thought was nice. And I ended up actually really liking Midwest Indigo now. It's definitely up there for one of my favorites on the album. And then speaking of favorites on the album, going into Routines in the Night, that one was a bit of a sleeper favorite for me. Because when I first heard it, I thought it was pretty good. I didn't really have any qualms against it. I didn't really think too much about it. I mean, first time listen, it's like I heard it, I was like, yeah, I like that. And then I just moved on. After listening to it, like 10 more times now, I really do like that song. I think it's a solid song on the album. I think the choruses in Routines of the Night are super good. I really enjoy them. They're really catchy. It's also a bit strange. Like it's one of those songs that definitely, like I was talking about, I think it could kind of disrupt the flow of the album a little bit depending on who you are. For me, I think it fits in well enough that it's not an issue, but it's one of the ones that I could definitely see fitting into that disorganized category, just because it is a bit different from Midwest Indigo and the previous singles before that. And then Vignette, not Vignette, Vignette, I mispronounced it last time. That one's a weird one because I really like the chorus. I like how Tyler hits those falsettos. I think the falsettos sound incredible. Every time I hear them, it's almost like I'm going to heaven. Despite that, though, I feel like the verses don't hit super hard. I don't think they're bad. I just think they're fine. So overall, I think the song's good, but I think the chorus does kind of carry it. Okay, and then obviously we talked about The Craving a little bit, but I'll go into it a little more. So I still think it's like obviously a little bit weird. It slows down the momentum of the album, but I do think it grew on me a little bit more. Like, I understand why people would like that one in the album. I do wish it was the single version, though. I think that would have been a lot better for the purpose of the album, and just because I think that one sounds a little better. This definitely, I'm surprised that this wasn't the single, or that this wasn't just like separated from the album and released like the day after or something as a separate single, because it really would have been better off if it was the other version. But yeah, I get it. It's kind of got a catchy chorus, but I do think it's also a bit generic, especially the acoustic version. Out of all the songs, because on the last video I talked about how some of the songs are a bit generic sounding, like they're not fully generic, but there's like a cloud of genericness, as some of you were saying, that kind of hovers over a lot of the songs on this one. And I think that one's one of the prime offenders, however you want to put it. I don't know. I feel like I've heard a lot of songs that kind of sound similar. Just that acoustic strumming love song type thing. And then we get onto Lavish. Now this one, Lavish was a controversial one on my last video. A lot of people really like Lavish. I didn't know it because I was doing a little bit of research right when I was listening to the album, and it looked like, I think it was one of the lower rated songs, so I just assumed more people will be on my page. But I mean, just like any other 21 Pilots song, everybody has something that they like, and that one has quite a bit of a following. And I get it now. After I listened to it a lot more, it's still not my favorite. I think it is still one of my least favorite songs. And I think The Craving, going back to that a little bit, is also definitely one of my least favorite 21 Pilots songs. Like, I think they're fine. Because Lavish, before, I just thought it was bad completely. Now I really get it, because I feel like in my mind when I was talking about it before, I kind of skipped over the verses, and to me, only the chorus stuck, and I don't like the chorus very much. Despite the chorus, though, I actually do like the verses, especially the second verse. What did I write down for that? Yeah. So I was just basically, I wrote down in my notes, I was like, yeah, the second verse is actually really good. The first verse, I think, is pretty good too. It just, I don't think it's as good as the second one. I think the choruses are really the main letdown for me on that one. I don't really like them. They don't really get my attention. But now that I've heard those verses and like actually recognize them a bit more, I definitely understand why people like that song as much as they do. Really, it just comes down to taste, obviously. But yeah, that one's still not for me, and I still think it's one of the worst songs on this album. Oh, I forgot. I also wrote down that it was kind of like a bizarro version of a Scaled and Icy song.
Look, Pim, I get what's going on here. They're the bizarro versions of us.
I didn't think about it like that beforehand, but now when I'm listening to it, I could see on like a just weird version of Scaled and Icy that went down a slightly different path. Like if they weren't going for their propaganda vibe that they were having on that album, I think Lavish could have made it on it. Let me know if you understand what I mean by that, because I realize it's kind of a vague descriptor for that song. But I'd really love to hear if anybody else can pick up on that, because for me, it's pretty clear now that it has like that, just some vibe about it that matches Scaled and Icy. Okay, and then Navigating. So Navigating was one that when I was talking about it, I was like, I don't really remember what that one really sounded like. Like, I think what I said is that I added it, but it didn't really stick out. Listening to it now, it's definitely one of the standouts, at least in the last half of the song. Oh my god. The last half of the song. I don't think it's one of my favorites on the album necessarily. I think it's pretty good. It's like solid, but it's nothing like too crazy. I think the chorus is really catchy, but a bit generic. I think that's another prime offender of like the genericness of this album, is that song. The chorus just sounds like a really, really radio friendly chorus. And that's not like necessarily bad. I just think, again, it just feels like I've heard it before, which I'm not super fond of. I wish it was a little bit better, especially because I really, really like the verses and the synths. I forgot the synths. The synths, I think, really stand out on that song compared to some of the other ones, because there's kind of like this, people call it different names. I tend to go with kind of like 80s synth revival. It doesn't necessarily sound like the 80s, to get that clear. Just, that's kind of a name that people give it. It's where they bring back those synths and it kind of becomes a integral part of the songs, because that's noticeable throughout several songs on this album. But I think in Navigating, it's more prevalent for sure. Oh, and then speaking of how it was like radio friendly, the choruses, I wouldn't be surprised if that was planned to be one of the singles for this album, because I think it would have done really well as a single. And that, again, that chorus is just so radio friendly, it would have made a lot of sense. That song just feels like it would have been a single song. If I had to choose which song it would have replaced, it probably would have been Backslide, to be honest. I think Backslide, it was a weird song to put out as a single, in my opinion. I thought it was strange that they decided that one was going to be the ones that they were going to put out, just because it was pretty experimental for their style, in my opinion. While Navigating, I feel like, is a lot more safe if they were to do that instead. But I'm not complaining, because I really, really liked Backslide. And then, okay, so I was talking about how Backslide was a bit experimental. I also thought Snapback was probably the most experimental song on the album. Previously, I liked it, and I still definitely do like it. I do feel like it's kind of more towards the middle of like out of the songs that I like on this album. It's not like super, super good, but I also just something about it, that experimental feeling it has just really kind of stands out to me. And I kind of gravitate to it just because it feels a lot more new than some of this other stuff, which kind of goes back to that slight generic feeling on some of these songs. So yeah, that one, I pretty much feel just about the same as I did beforehand. But yeah, with how that one sounds, like I definitely understand why people don't particularly like Snapback. I love the experimental nature of it though. I really do. I think it spices up the album a little bit without straying too far from the sound. Although I will say it still does feel like it's a bit out of left field theme-wise with the album. Not theme-wise, but sound-wise. Just I don't know what they're doing with this album. I'm not 100% sure what sound they're going for throughout. Like it feels like it's definitely a core component of rock and like alt rock, but at the same time, it's very just all over the place. And I think that's another song. Snapback is definitely another song that fits in the category of feeling like it could be on the album, but also I definitely could see why it wouldn't be, because it's a strange one. Oh yeah, there's one more thing I wanted to say about Snapback. So when I was listening to the choruses, actually the most recent time is the only time I've noticed it, I could have sworn that I was hearing Tyler's wife Jenna talk over some of the lyrics in the chorus, like as a background voice. I don't know if it was just like a slight voice changer of some sort, or modulator, whatever you want to call it, or if it was her, because it almost sounded like her in a couple instances. That's purely speculation, so if you happen to know, let me know, but I think it could go either way. I wasn't able to tell. Oh, and okay, so one more thing about Snapback. The like last half, they had this, I'm not sure if it's technically a bridge or not, but it's like a bridge that leads into the final chorus. And I really, really actually like that part a lot. The way that it just kind of fades right into the chorus is perfect for the outro of that song. I think that was absolutely perfect. Okay, now on to Oldie Station. So this one, I think I actually liked more beforehand, and now I get why it's like the lowest performing song on this album. I think it's kind of forgettable versus a lot of other songs on this one. Like every time I listen to it, I always forget what it's going to sound like, especially because the beginning to me is a bit boring. I think the beginning is possibly one of the worst parts of this album. But then once you get to the second half is so good. It pretty much just redeems the first half not being that good. The second half is just fantastic. It's almost like the calm before the storm, with the first half being the calm and then the second half being the storm. Because really, once you get past that first part, I think it picks up a lot more, becomes a lot catchier. It just feels like it's better produced too in the latter half of the song, and I really appreciate that. I think it kind of saves that song from being one that I just wouldn't listen to. So yeah, overall, I want to say it's a pretty good song just because that last half is so good. Okay, so at the risk of feeling dumb, in my original notes, I was like, this isn't really a standout song. It's not particularly great, and it doesn't really stick out in the last half of the album very well. And then I actually just wrote down strike that. Never mind. Like, I changed my mind completely. I think that's actually one of the better songs in the latter half of the album. I think it does stand out compared to all the other ones, really. It just feels like it's going back into what the vibe of the vinyl at the beginning was, and I think that's really good. It helps kind of bring it together a bit more right before the end. That song and then the beginning ones kind of encapsulate the other ones that don't quite match as well. So I think it kind of works out, and it helps kind of drive the album back to what the original sound was. I just think that's a nice thing to have right there at the end, especially when the last several songs really just kind of strayed away from what sound we were having. And actually, now that I think about it, I didn't take a note on this, but I could actually see this song being on either Trench or Blurry Face. It's kind of like an in-betweener. I really could see it being on both a little bit. I think it'd have to be changed slightly for either, but I think it could fit in. I didn't actually think about that before. Okay, so the final song on the album, Paladin Straight, I really, really like this song as an outro. It just feels super cool. They really build up a cool atmosphere throughout that song, especially with like the birds chirping for like a minute in between the last minute and then the previous 4 minutes. So the atmosphere just feels really cool. I think it's just, I don't know, having an atmosphere like that at the end of an album is like absolutely perfect. And then the song itself just sounds really good. Weirdly enough, though, I don't think it's something that you can really listen to outside of the album, just because that minute of bird chirpings really does, it kind of throws that idea out the window, because you're not going to be like in the car jamming out to this song as a single just like in a playlist of other songs just because of that bird chirping. Oh, maybe you will. It definitely fits better on the album for me than what it does individually. And that's not a problem. Some songs really do need to be like that for an album. And don't need to be, but I think they can add a lot of character and make the album a lot better. And I think that's what this song did. I think it's a really good outro. The only thing I thought was weird about it is, again, going back to the lore feeling that I was talking about in the beginning, or not the beginning, but the previous video. It's like it's weirdly trying to cater towards the lore with that last 10-15 seconds of the song, and it just feels weird. It just feels like their last minute being like, yeah, let's throw in some lore in there and try to keep the story going a bit. It leaves me confused on if they're trying to say that the lore is not actually done on this last album and there's going to be like more, or if it's like, okay, finally it's over. It was left vague enough that they could go either way, and maybe that was on purpose so then they could make the decision later on if they actually want to end it or not. I'm not sure about that. To me, it doesn't really make sense. And then one last thing I want to say about the song. I do really, really like the build-up on the song. Once it gets past like the first third of the song and that build-up really starts hitting, I think it sounds really, really good. I super enjoy that part of the song up until where it gets to the birds chirping. I think all of that sounds fantastic. So like, as for my final like total thoughts on this album, I hate to say it, but I think, and hear me out on this first, because I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me on this, but I think it is my least favorite 21 Pilots album. And the reason for that being is that just a lot of their previous albums, it's a mix of just nostalgia for me and the fact that I enjoy every song on those albums. They might not have as good of songs like in total as some of the ones on Clancy, but I think as an album, I prefer them just because I can listen to the whole thing with no skips. Well, Clancy, I found myself, even when listening to it, I did find myself skipping the Craving and Lavish a couple times. I think those are the only two that I really skip, other than sometimes I'd skip Overcompensate just because I've heard it so much since it's been out for, what's it been, like a few months now? It's been a while since that one's been out, maybe like 2 months. So that one I was getting a little bored of, so I skipped that one a couple times, but I'm not going to really count that towards it. But the fact that there's any skips on it for me at all, I think is really what keeps me from wanting to rank it any higher. And that's not necessarily against any of the songs because, well, it is a little bit, but it's not necessarily because of like production or anything is worse on this album. Again, nostalgia is definitely a hard hitter on those previous albums, and then some of them I just genuinely like a lot more. Like Trench, I think Trench is a lot better. Blurry Face, I think, is a lot better. Even Scaled and Icy. I'll be the first to admit, I think Scaled and Icy is a really good album, sound-wise. Even if I understand a lot of people could see it as being generic, but I think it's a fun album, and sometimes it's just nice to have a generic album on, which that kind of brings me back. Like, even if this album does have some generic elements in it, that's not really a problem for me. I don't really care. As long as I like the sound of it, it doesn't really bother me too much. Sometimes it depends. But yeah, and then we go back to like Vessel. I really like Vessel. I feel like I'm kind of making it seem like it's all nostalgia, and that's not even the case because it's just, I really, really love those songs. Vessel, Regional at Best. Regional at Best, it might actually be one of my favorites. I really like Regional at Best. If we wanted to go all the way back to, no pun intended, Tyler Joseph's album, I think this one might be a little better than that, but that's not a 21 Pilots album, so I'm not going to count that. So yeah, as a whole, I was definitely disappointed with this album. It's still going to be one I come back to and listen to in entirety, just because I don't hate it or anything. I still really enjoy it, because I don't want to make it come across like I really dislike this album. 21 Pilots really does mean a lot to me, and I've listened to them for so long, it's hard for me to like dislike anything that they put out. The fact that there's any skips on this at all just really, and it hurts a little bit just because I wish I liked them more than what I do, like Lavish and Craving. So yeah, I'd definitely been a lot of rambling on this album, but I do really, really enjoy it. I think it sounds good as a whole. It is my least favorite 21 Pilots album I've heard. Maybe I'll like it more in the future. If I do, I'll be sure to leave an update. Thank you guys for sticking around this long if you have. And yeah, feel free to let me know how you feel about the album in the comments, what points you disagree on, which points you agree on. I'd be happy to hear it. And anyways, I will see you later. Bye-bye.